Okay, welcome back, everyone. We appreciate you returning for the second half of our 2020 Ohio River Symposium this afternoon. We have another great list of speakers lined up for this afternoon session. Before we get into the speakers, we're going to have hear a few words from one of the WAMO annual conference sponsors and Ohio River Symposium sponsors. Tyson Lamiel with Davy Resource Group. So Tyson, welcome, and go ahead and share your message with us.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Tyson Lamiel. I'm a business developer with Davy Resource Group. I hope you're having a great conference and happy election day. Thanks, WAMO, for the opportunity to talk about how awesome Davy Resource Group is. We are an environmental, ecological, and urban forestry consulting firm. We're based out of Kent, Ohio. Some of the services that we provide our clients are professional civil engineering and surveying, design, build, stream, and wetland restoration, stormwater management and compliance, ecosystem restoration, urban and community forestry services, and invasive species management and control. Also wanted to spend a little bit of time sharing some fun DRG announcements. Same as everyone else, this was a challenging year for us, but we figured out ways to manage and carry on. And one of the neat announcements I'm sharing with you today are we recently successfully completed an acquisition of TGC Engineering out of Sharon Center, Ohio. We've had a long-standing relationship with TGC, and we're excited to bring that group in. It's been fun getting to know them better and starting to work on projects with them. So, warm welcome to TGC. And we also recently purchased and got licensed to operate a drone. We've been using drones for a while now for various things, but this one's a little different. It can be used to apply herbicides when we're trying to control invasive vegetation. And that does a lot of things for us. It helps us do the work quicker, more efficiently, and more safely. The person operating the drone can now stay at a safe distance of the drone applying the product. So we're really excited to put that into action. And lastly, I'd like to announce that I'm hosting a webinar for DRG on December 10th at 1 p.m. And the subject matter is water management. And that's not a new conversation for DRG, but it is the first webinar we've done on that content. The discussion is going to be a holistic and comprehensive approach to water management on your property from the very moment it enters your property to the moment that it leaves your property. So I'd love to have you join us for that conversation. That's all I have for now. If you'd like any more information on the services that we provide, or if you want to see our drone in action, or if you'd like to join us for the webinar that I mentioned, reach out. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you have a great conference, and take care.
Okay, thank you very much, Tyson. You might want to, if you want, you could put your contact information in the chat room there so people could see it as throughout the afternoon, since you won't have your slide up for the whole time. So might do that in case some of the folks didn't have a chance to write down your contact information. So our first speaker this afternoon is Greg Lips. And Greg is the Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Coordinator for the Ohio Biodiversity Conservation Partnership at The Ohio State University. And I had the opportunity to go out and release some hellbenders with Greg and his team late last summer, in a scenic river. That's all I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to give you any more information. It's all very top secret where these animals are going. But it was a wonderful experience, great day. It's the first time I'd ever, in all my travels, first time I've ever actually got to handle any hellbenders, and they're just a fascinating animal, truly unique animal. It's almost like felt like you're releasing little dinosaurs or something. back into the world. So Greg is going to share some of his knowledge with us today about hellbenders. And before receiving his master's degree in biology from Bowling Green University, Greg worked at the Toledo Zoo's Department of Herpetology. So Greg, welcome. Glad to have you here today. Thank you very much.
Great. Hey, thanks so much for the invite, Bob. I really appreciate it. And I love get the chance to talk about hellbenders. Everybody hear me all right? Somebody throw a thumbs up there. Yep. Okay, great. So I want to start by thanking the Ohio Division of Wildlife because without them, nothing that I'm presenting here would be here. All this work has been supported by the division, and particularly John Navarro and all the support that he has given to this project throughout the years. Whenever I talk about salamanders, I always like to start with this slide because I think it's so important for people to realize that if you live in Eastern North America, you live in the salamander capital of the world. Most of the places out there, there are no salamanders, or maybe there's one species of salamander. But if you are lucky enough to live here in the Eastern United States, you could go to a place like the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, where there's 28 species of salamanders in a single county there. We are truly the salamander capital. And to paraphrase Spider-Man, with great salamanders comes great salamander responsibilities. We have great responsibility when it comes to salamander conservation. So the group I'm going to talk about today is this family Cryptobranchidae, which is one of the oldest lineages of salamanders, and it's the largest surviving salamanders in the world are in this Cryptobranchidae. On the left there is the largest of them all, the Chinese giant salamander. The center is the Japanese giant salamander, and then by comparison, our little minute eastern hellbender. There are two species of hellbenders, both the eastern and the Ozark, which I'll discuss a little bit here in a second. So just a quick background on kind of biological information. As I said, they're big by standards of a salamander, over 2 foot long, completely aquatic animals. They don't come out of the water except when you set one on a rock to take its photograph like I did here. You see those wrinkles on the side of their skin. That wrinkly skin is highly vascularized. That's how they respire, do their gas exchange. Their lungs are very poorly vascularized, are not really used much for breathing. They're very opportunistic feeders. They sit underneath the rock. Anything that comes underneath that rock, they eat. Most of the time, that's crayfish. We know they live a very long time, probably 30. We know over 35 years is possible, maybe much longer. And we know very little about their larvae. When they hatch, they have gills like most salamanders do. And they go through a kind of a partial metamorphosis. They never grow up into that land-dwelling salamander that we're used to, but they lose their gills at about 1.5 years old. But what's going on during that time is not something we know a lot about. Probably spending a lot of time based on a little bit of data in the interstitial spaces of our gravel beds in our streams. Look at their distribution. There's been a couple of genetics projects that have come to the conclusion that we have basically these 8 management units, what we probably would have called in the olden days subspecies, but we don't do that anymore. Ohio is squarely within this Ohio-Susquehanna drainage. If you look out to the west there in Missouri and Arkansas, those 3 southern watersheds make up the Ozark subspecies, which is federally listed, and that area named Northern Ozarks, that is, those are actually eastern hellbenders, but those were recently listed by under the Endangered Species Act also. So all the salamanders found out there in the disjunct portion are all federally listed. Hellbenders everywhere now receive some level of protection in every state in which they're found. So I was lucky enough in the early 2000s to get to run around with Ralph Fingston and conduct surveys for hellbenders, following up on the surveys that he had done in the mid 1980s. And we spent nearly 1,500 person hours in the water, 24 different waterways, lifted the great big rocks, swam underneath them, and pulled out hellbenders. So we had 89 captures in 11 of 24 of the waterways that we surveyed. But most important was, if we just looked at the places that Ralph captured hellbenders in the mid 80s and then where we were capturing them in the 2000s, and just looked at how many were we capturing in the number of person hours spent, the relative abundance, we saw this very, very large decline. And luckily I had Ralph with me to tell me that we weren't doing anything wrong. There just wasn't that many hellbenders left. And we don't have any records, any recent records from Western Ohio. They're almost certainly gone from all of Western Ohio. To dig into the data a little more, what we see is not only was there a big decline in relative abundance, but there's also a shift in demographics. So that top graph gives you an idea of what we think a good hellbender population should look like, and what we found in only 2 of our watersheds, where you have a few youngsters, you have a few older animals, but you have this nice bell curve of individuals of many sizes. But the rest of the watersheds, what we found is like that bottom graph. It basically looks like you're living in a nursing home for hellbenders, nothing but big old animals and very, very few of them. So we know that the mode of decline is this lack of recruitment into the population of youngsters. One of the great things of doing work for the Ohio Division of Wildlife was it wasn't good enough to just say, okay, they're in trouble. It was, okay, what do we do about it? And so in 2012, we wrote a conservation plan for the hellbender. What can we do to get these delisted, to recover them? And we have this lofty goal of having multiple viable populations in watersheds throughout the state. Those blue colored ones were kind of our target where we thought we might be able to make this happen. And to reach that objective, we came up with 2 broad objectives. The first objective is protect and restore what we have. Where there's hellbenders, where there's habitat, let's keep that, let's make it better, not lose it. And the second one was let's try repatriating to places where they've been eliminated, or augmenting populations where they're declining. So that first objective is really relied a lot on partners. This is just one of many of our partners. Captina Conservancy, which I helped get off the ground in 2008. And when we found that Captina was an important watershed, it was pretty surprising to also learn at the same time that there was all of 52 acres in the watershed that were protected in the form of Dysart Woods. And Captina had the highest average IBI score of any watershed in the state of Ohio, according to the Ohio EPA. So arguably one of the best watersheds in the state, but really nothing going on out there. And the Captina Conservancy has raised millions of dollars and protected thousands of acres at this point. Been a great partnership. Lots and lots of other partners also. The individual you see there looking into that cooler full of hellbenders is a landowner who we eventually were able to purchase the 250-acre conservation easement from through Western Reserve Land Conservancy and with support from Williams. We've also done riparian plantings, land acquisitions. It's just, again, partners have been involved to make all these things happen. Our second objective was to repatriate and augment. And I remember when I first brought this up, Ralph Fingston saying, well, how are you ever going to find nests? At that point, only one nest had ever been found in Ohio, and that was by Ralph in the mid-'80s. And I wasn't sure how we were going to do it either, but I talked to a lot of people and started trying to figure it out. On the left, you can see a borescope. This works pretty well for peering underneath these great big rocks, and you can see the hellbender head looking back at you. But what we learned pretty quickly was that when the males are getting ready to breed in August, they become quite aggressive, and just snorkeling with a dive light and peering under these rocks, oftentimes you can see the animals right there at the edge, like you see the one here on the right. Also notice that that's a hellbender skeleton laying in front of that rock. These animals are incredibly brutal to each other during the breeding season, and the males beat each other up and occasionally, I guess, even kill each other. When the males are getting ready to breed, their cloacas become big and swollen. The one on the right there, you can actually see the milt that he's producing. So he's underneath this great big rock. The females come under there, lay their eggs, he fertilizes them, then he quickly kicks her out. I also point out, and I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but on this left photo, that's bone sticking out through that animal's leg there, and he's missing his left leg. This animal's missing his right leg. Again, these are brutal critters when it comes to breeding. The males beat each other up pretty bad. So they're so aggressive that sometimes you can just wiggle a stick out in front of their nest that the male's protecting, and they'll come out and attack it. And that animal, we were able to get to come out from underneath there, and that allowed us to slip this modified grappling hook underneath the rock and extract the eggs. We've done this over 30 times now. And you can see there when we find our nest mostly is in second week of September is kind of our peak. Interestingly, it seems like the larger watersheds are later in the season. The only guess I have there is that they may be queuing in on the cold nights that start coming in the end of August, beginning of September, and the big watersheds just take longer to chill down. And so the breeding is a little bit later in our larger watersheds. We transfer these eggs to coolers. We have 3 biosecure facilities in the state, one at the Toledo Zoo that you see here, another one at the Columbus Zoo, and another one at Penta Career Center. Biosecure meaning that the keepers scrub in, change their clothes before they go in there, separate ventilation system from the rest of the animals. The last thing we want to do is transfer some exotic pathogen over to these animals if they're going to be released back into the wild. We start with these little eggs and larvae. After about 7 months, animals look like this. A year and 7 months, they look like this. And here's what they look like when we're getting ready to release them. And this stage, they're obviously a lot less vulnerable to predation. And also, they also have reached a size where if you were trying to keep them much longer in captivity, they're beating each other up. So they take up a lot more room. So this is kind of our target, is to get them to 3 years for release. And we've released a lot of them. In 2012 and 2013, we released very small numbers, kind of pilot projects. Those were all telemetred animals to see how they did. All had radio telemetry units implanted in them. Since then, we've ramped up the program. This year was easily the most that we've released, with 416, which was quite a bit of work to do in a year where, with COVID, I just realized that I did not update that total number, but that total number should be add 400 onto that. 26 sites and 10 watersheds animals have been released into. And it's always, it's an incredible experience when you're snorkeling one of these streams and you look under a rock and you see one of the babies you released. So the one on the left there was released a year earlier. The one on the right was released 30 days earlier. And once the hellbenders have been out in the wild, most of our mortality of released animals occurs very early on, and it occurs when they make some pretty bad decisions, and the biggest predator has been raccoons. But once they've been out there for a while, they seem to settle in under these great big rocks, which is how hellbenders normally act, and seem to be doing well. Another thing that we've been doing is adding artificial structures for hellbenders. So these are called bender huts or hellbender huts. This idea first came to us when we were visiting Japan and looking at the things they were building for Japanese giant salamanders. And Jeff Brigler, the state herpetologist of Missouri, and he went back and said, I'm going to try building some of these, and tried a bunch of different designs. And this is the design he came up with. So it mimics a cavity underneath a big rock. The ones on the left there are simply model hellbenders going in, but the one on the right is an Ohio hellbender looking back out at us from a hellbender hut. And of course, the most exciting thing is when you go and check one of these hellbender huts, and you find that not only is there a hellbender using them, but they're laying eggs inside of them. This is really exciting, because if we're going to figure out what's going on and why we're not seeing recruitment, we need to know what's going on underneath these great big rocks, and that's just impossible. So by having the hellbender hut, it's kind of like having a bluebird box, gives us a chance to see inside the nest and see what's going on. You can see there the hellbender, the male hellbender that's guarding that nest. So he's got a lot of duties. He's going to eat bad eggs out of there to keep fungus from spreading, but he also is going to fan those eggs to keep them oxygenated. And if the eggs don't get moved around, the embryos will actually adhere to the egg wall and die. So the male is absolutely a necessity in this situation. I'm going to move forward a little bit here, but you can see the embryos in there are fairly well developed. This video was taken last summer. So we still have a lot of challenges with hellbenders, and especially the hellbender habitat in the state. And 3 of them are listed here. This is coal country that we're working in a lot of these areas, and we have a lot of pollution issues. Captina Creek had another discharge this year from the slurry impoundment, and that has happened at least 8 times since I've been working in the area. For folks that don't visit Eastern Ohio, it's hard to get across the magnitude of the number of pipeline constructions that have occurred in the past several years with the fracking boom, and also with the fracking boom, the water withdrawals. All of our creeks are susceptible to withdrawals of water for fracking. As I mentioned, Western Ohio hellbenders appear to be gone from, and it's probably pretty easy to figure out why. If you look at the amount of forest in the watersheds, Western Ohio, most of our watersheds have very little forest. Hellbenders need lots of forest in order to survive. Eastern Ohio, we still have more forested watersheds. Unfortunately, this is a mirror image of where the fracking boom is occurring. As you can see on the right side there, where all the drilling is occurring is in the same area. So again, lots of challenges. Here's a Google Earth image from Captina Creek in October 2015. You can see a pipeline being constructed crossing a tributary to Captina. You can see the silt plume coming down. This was pretty common during that time, 2014, 15, 16, to have these big plumes of silt from construction activities. But more recently, what we've noticed is just cloudier water in general on more often, not necessarily plumes that we could work above. When I did an EPA public records request for complaints in the Captina watershed and violations to try to figure out where's all this silt coming from, a single company self-reported over 70 violations when they purchased another company. And these are some of the images that they included. And it's a pretty easy to figure out where all the silt's coming from when you look at this. We can't plant enough trees to do anything about the amount of silt that will come from these slipping hillsides. And these are all tributaries to the Captina watershed. So I mentioned forest cover, and there's now more than, there's 4 or 5 papers now showing that there's 2 very good predictors of how hellbenders are doing: the percent forest cover shown here on the x-axis and the conductivity of the stream. Most of the time, these are very correlated. As you have less forest cover, you have higher conductivities. That's not necessarily the case in Ohio because of the influence of mine drainage. But importantly, what most people are finding is that when we get forest cover below 55%, hellbender populations are on their way out. When we get conductivity above 300, populations are on their way out. So again, looking at this graph, what's really looking for is this bottom right quadrant. That's where we would expect to see our best hellbender habitat. Most of our streams have much higher conductivity and much lower forest cover than what we think is probably ideal for hellbenders. But we have found fertilized developing eggs in all of these here, places with very high conductivities. Last year, we collected a nest where the conductivity was an astounding 1,300 microsiemens per cubic centimeter, and these were developing eggs. And we've also seen some evidence of recruitment in just a couple of streams, but again, with pretty high conductivities and pretty low forest cover. So that gives us some hope. And then, of course, there is the one that makes it into this bottom right quadrant. It looks like we might have one stream that'd be really good. And this is just a reminder that there's lots of ways to mess up a watershed. This is what that creek looks like. Unfortunately, upstream, there's been a lot of impacts that have created a lot of mud in the creek. And then there's just been a whole lot of dumping that's gone on there. So I don't say all this to be a downer. We just have a lot of challenges when it comes to hellbender conservation. But luckily, we have a lot of great partners too, and I couldn't be happier with the partnership that we have that's working to reverse this decline. A lot of zoos, a lot of agencies and schools that are involved in trying to help out the hellbender. So I always like this quote that we must give up on the self-serving belief that an increase in our scientific knowledge by itself will always move us toward effective conservation. There's lots of research to be done with hellbenders, but the truth is we know a lot that needs to be done, and it isn't necessarily research related. We need to increase the amount of forest cover and reduce the amount of pollutants that are entering our creeks, because ultimately an effective conservation planner links knowing and doing, and that requires the people. So once again, I'd like to thank the Ohio Division of Wildlife and John Navarro specifically for all the great support that he's given this program and all the partners that have been involved. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions. I'm sure hopefully Bob has a few.
Yes, we do have a couple questions. Thank you, Greg. First question here from Kyle Seitz. How old are hellbenders at sexual maturity?
We think they reproduce probably at age 8 is probably their first reproduction. We know that the males may produce sperm earlier than that, just from necropsies that have been done on animals that have died at the zoo, but about age 8.
Okay, thank you. And Meg Marhelski, I'm sorry, asks, what is the survival success rate from egg retrieval until the youngsters are ready to be released?
Boy, that is all over the board, and it's something I'm hoping to compile here soon and publish. We have had nests where everything doesn't make it, not zero survivorship. And then we've had nests where we've had well over 90% survivorship. And I'm really interested in trying to understand why that is. And I'm not really certain that we have the answers, but we've seen it all over. If you look at the numbers from the wild, we think it's probably about 0.1% that make it from an egg to sexual maturity. So we know we can do much, much better than that in captivity. We can up that number into, much higher number.
Okay, great. And hang on, I got a couple of questions coming in here all at the same time. Well, a few folks like your T-shirt. They want to know where can I get that T-shirt?
Yeah.
So
sorry. Yeah. Can't help you there.
You can't? I was gonna say, if you got it.
That T-shirt was the best thing I ever did. I had those made and gave them out to the original partnership partners, and it was the best team building thing I ever did. And we made a different one, a new one, and did a fundraiser with it, but that one there is retired.
And Martin McAllister, who's going to be speaking to us here in just a little bit, asks, how does a group become involved in the Hellbender Partnership? And he's thinking particularly about his organization, the Friends of Scioto Brush Creek.
Send me an email and remind me, because I'd love to have you involved for sure. And I need to do a better job of expanding a little bit into some of these other friends groups and partners groups, because as I mentioned, all of these problems need a lot of help.
And I'm sorry, Greg, there's one more question here. I overlooked it, from Rebecca Davis. What was the name of the only stream that was in the lower quadrant?
That was the Little Scioto River, which surprisingly runs through Wayne National Forest. In fact, that portion of where you saw that photograph is actually in the Wayne National Forest, but it has been a dumping ground for a long time.
Okay, here's some more. Are you looking to release any hellbenders on the western side of the state at some point?
Not at this moment, because I don't think we're going to get to a point where we could have viable populations in the western portion of the state. We've looked at some streams over there. We spent some time in the Stillwater River, but I just don't see anything where we get the level of forest and low enough sediment to possibly establish populations.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
guys.
you again for taking time this afternoon to speak to us. Appreciate it. Appreciate your work you're doing with those animals. Like I said earlier, it's a fascinating animal. And good luck to you, Greg.
Thank you. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity to share all this with you guys. Take care.
You're welcome. Thank you. So our next speaker, we're going to go from hellbenders to freshwater mussels. So we have Dr. Michael Hogarth, professor of biology at Otterbein University, and one of the co-authors of the Freshwater Mussels of Ohio. And Dr. Hogarth helped us out last summer on the Little Miami River with some survey work. He's done extensive mussel surveys across the state, as you can imagine. He's done the Little Miami. This was the third time, so I'm sure he's going to talk about that as part of his presentation. But there's a lot of concern about the state of freshwater mussels in Ohio, and they're declining in even some of our highest quality stream systems, and some of our scenic rivers, where everything else is fish and macroinvertebrates and other biological groups are going gangbusters. So we're concerned about that, and looking to Dr. Hogarth to help us out in the future as well on some other studies, since maybe the Olentangy next summer. So Dr. Hogarth, welcome, and thanks for participating in today's symposium.
Sure, thanks. Can you see my screen and hear me?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Okay, good. So yeah, thanks, Bob. And let me just say at the beginning that scenic rivers and natural areas has been a real partner in freshwater mussel work. And so thank you, and thank natural areas too for this. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to have little snippets of mussels showing up from time to time. And this is a federally endangered species on the slide right here. This is called the Epioblasma triquetra, the snuff box. And it's a federally endangered species, and one of the best populations that we have in the United States is in the Grand River. Okay, is it going to work? Okay, I can't get it to advance. I'm going to stop sharing that one and share this one. There we go. And so here's my outline for the talk. So I'm going to talk first about all of the mollusks that we have in the state. I'm going to take a little bit of time, not a lot. And then we're going to key in on the freshwater mussels, talk a little bit about
Dr. Hogarth?
Yes?
I'm sorry, I don't think we can see your screen yet.
Okay, well, let me see about starting this thing over again. Can you see it now?
No, sir.
No. Well, let's hit this again. Well, stop sharing.
So it will ask you for a window. Select the window that the PowerPoint is in. There you go.
Okay, so you can now see that?
Yes, put
Yes.
it in presentation.
Okay, and so then can you still see it?
Yes.
Let's see if it advances. Okay, good. We're good. Are we good?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so then I'm going to talk a little bit about the Little Miami River data that I just finished this year, 30 years of data, and then a little bit on the status of the mussels of Ohio. And so these are the mollusks that we might find in fresh water in Ohio. And so we have both the bivalves, that's this group right here, and the gastropods, and those are these right here, just the aquatic gastropods. I've put some pictures of some mussels along the edge, and there's a number of here that I would like to talk about, but let me just talk about this one right here. Okay, just a little bit of a snippet. In the late 90s at Otterbein University, where I teach, I took a group of students on a canoe float from Alum Creek Dam, just below Alum Creek Dam, to the Westerville Reservoir. And I found just hundreds of these little mussels right here. And this species of mussels was just recently listed for review for federal status as a threatened species. It's called the round hickory nut. And so Megan, Michael, and I from ODOT went over to this area where I found all of these. And this is a juvenile mussel of that round hickory nut that's found in Elm Creek. Still a pretty good population of those mussels in Elm Creek. Anyway, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the snails first, and then the bivalves next. We have two groups of snails that occur in our streams in Ohio, and I put this up here primarily because of this family of snails right here, the pleurisarids. And here we have a pleurisarid snail. It's a river snail, and this pleurisarid snail is found wherever water quality is really good. And so I usually look for this first before I start looking for freshwater mussels, because if I can find this, or in fact, this one right here, which is a larger uh, river snail, then water quality is probably pretty good, and particularly the amount of oxygen in the water. On the other hand, if I'm going out and I find this snail, this is a lung breathing, a pulmonate snail. If I find this snail, then chances are water quality is not good, or there's a problem with the amount of oxygen in the water. This is a phyceid. The rest of these are pond species, except for these guys down here, the limpets, which are found in streams. So we'll go on, oops. So these are the other clams that we have in Ohio. We have two introduced species, and I'll talk about these a little bit as we get into the Little Miami River data. So this right here is the Asiatic clam, and then these are the zebra mussel and the quagga mussel, the dracenids. And so these come into play and my interpretation of what's been happening in the Little Miami River system. I'm not going to talk about these, but for completion's sake, these are the pea clam, the small native clam, and then the fingernail clams, the thicker one and the thinner one. So let's go here. So let's talk about the freshwater mussels of Ohio. Well, we have 80 species of mussels that have been recorded for the state. 11 of those species are extirpated and 6 are extinct. The rest are remaining. And of the 80 species, 15 of those species are listed as endangered or threatened by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. 2 others, as I just mentioned, 2 others are currently in review for listing as threatened. And according to DNR, there are 24 Ohio endangered species, 4 Ohio threatened, and 8 species of concern. Freshwater mussels are among the most threatened of all of our species in the state of Ohio. And so why are they vulnerable? Well, many live their life completely buried in the substrate. And so whatever is delivered in the substrate to the bottom is delivered to them. The wartyback that I have here, you can see this shell was not cleaned when I brought it up out of the bottom. That's because it was living its entire life buried in the substrate, and the sand was cleaning that animal off. While feeding, they separate food from fine particles, and so excessive sedimentation can bury them, or it can interfere with feeding and reproduction and respiration. All of those things happen with the gills of freshwater mussels. And so we see, for example, wrapped around this mussel is that fine sediment that it's deposited along the outside of its shell. And they depend on a host to complete their life cycle. So whatever affects their host also impacts them. But they're quite useful. Their nacre, the inside of their shell, is a mother of pearl, and they're used both for natural and cultured pearls, but not in Ohio. It's illegal to collect mussels for pearls, and it's illegal to collect mussels in Ohio to sell to the cultured pearl industry. They are food for other wildlife. You can go to any dam site and go downstream where it has free flowing area. The mussels accumulate in those areas, and so then too will the predators of the mussels accumulate in those areas. Their habitat for other forms of wildlife. We often find pupa of caddisflies on the shells of freshwater mussels. And quite often leeches are found on the dead shells, on the inner surface of the dead shells of freshwater mussels. As I showed earlier, they can filter water and help clean that water. They stabilize stream beds. They anchor themselves with their foot and can keep the stream bed from moving downstream and stabilize those environments. They are good water quality indicators. And by that, I mean they indicate both good water quality or exceptional high quality water, but there are some species that can live in more silt tolerant kinds of places. And so we can look at those to see if they're increasing in number and say something about the sedimentation that's happening in that environment. They have aesthetic research and I would say inspirational values that all help with this idea of biodiversity. And there are threats to mussels. This was a scene that I saw on the Little Miami River when I was there, and this last year. And it was they were cleaning out a log jam in front of that pier, and any structure or construction that gets into the stream bed and disturbs the stream bed, of course, would disturb mussels. Anything that covers that stream bed would cover mussels. And so in-stream construction can be a real challenge for freshwater mussels. Dams can be a challenge because they restrict the movement of fish upstream and downstream. The last few years, we've been taking dams out, and before we take a dam out, we've been relocating mussels in the impoundments, and we've been finding that impoundments may not be as destructive as the dam itself. Introduced and invasive species, I'll have a little bit more to say about this later, but these introduced species can outcompete. They can, if it's a zebra mussel, they can attach to the outside shell of a freshwater mussel and then essentially cause that mussel to starve. Water pollution is a problem. The loss of a host species can be an issue for freshwater mussels. It doesn't necessarily have to affect the mussel itself. It can affect those things that fish that are hosts for that. Climate change causing these increasing flooding events followed by drought can be difficult for mussels, and then fragmentation, sedimentation, viruses, other reasons for mussels to die in situ. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about 30 years of change in the mussel fauna of the Little Miami River. Now, just let me say that we don't necessarily have 30 years of data on any other river system in Ohio. This is it. And so starting in 1990 and 91, I went to the Little Miami River and sampled at 105 sites throughout the entire watershed. I had my son with me helping. I had my wife with me helping. I had anyone who would go out with me helping on that survey. And we spent a lot of hours looking at the mussels of the system. Prior to that, Clark in 1948 had self-published a report on the mussels of the main stem, but that was it. This was the first systematic study of the mussels of that system. In 2006 and 2007, Natural Areas in Little Miami Incorporated financed the second study of this watershed. And then this last year and the year before, Scenic Rivers funded this last study, 15 years apart in each case. So let's look at some big picture comparisons first. And let me just tell you up front that it's not going to be real good news. So some of it is better than others, but it's not all really good news. And so for the Little Miami main stem, we had a total of 36 species in the system in 1990. 30 of those species came from the Little Miami River main stem. At that time, we collected over 1,200 living and dead mussels. Now, I'm going to explain that one of the great things about looking at mussels as far as environments are concerned and streams are concerned is that we can find them alive. We can find them as freshly dead shells, and that's what that D refers to right there, is a freshly dead shell. We can find them as weathered shells, maybe dead for somewhere between 5 and 20 years, and we can find them as subfossil shells. And so I'm going to refer to the living and dead mussels that we found as the extant individuals rather than just extant species. And so that's, I wanted to make that clear. We didn't find any corbicula. This was an introduced species that would outcompete some of the juvenile mussels. Yeah, 15 years later, we found fewer species. In 2019-20, we found fewer yet, and almost all those losses were in the headwaters. We found fewer number of individuals, but we sampled about half the sites. We sampled 41 rather than 105 sites. We only sampled the best 41 sites, but we sampled those 41 sites. And we used a different method. We used some time sampling for 3 hours and then some quadrat sampling for 10 square meters. We repeated those same methods in 2019-20, essentially the same number of living mussels, but quite a few fewer corbicula, which suggests to us a couple things. One is that whatever was affecting the mussels in the system in the headwaters was also affecting all the mollusks in the system, including the introduced ones. We find that data is even worse in Todd's Fork, Little Miami River. We went from 15 species to 1, and now we have 4 species, but only 5 living and dead mussels were found in that system as we sampled that. We see that in Caesar Creek, we went from 14 to 5 and now 7 species of mussels, but we had a dramatic decrease in the number of individuals that were collected as live and dead animals. From 409, certainly using different methods, but from 409 to 18 and now 14, the decrease is phenomenal. And not only that, but we went from essentially a few corbicula to a huge number of corbicula during 2006, 2007, and the addition of the zebra mussel to almost no corbicula, and all the zebra mussels were gone. And so whatever is affecting the mussels in these 2 streams, particularly Todd's Fork and Caesar Creek, are also affecting the non-native species. And then a little bit of hope at the end. In the East Fork of Little Miami River, we saw the least amount of change. These same data are shown here. The blue line is 1990, 2000, or 1990, 91. Orange is 6 and 7. And then the gray is 19 and 20. Over on the y-axis, we have a number of extant individuals, and so that's the living and dead individuals. And we can see that in the headwaters, that's the far right side of this graph, large number of individuals going down to essentially Beaver Creek, just below Beaver Creek and Xenia. There's some water quality issues right there, then shooting back up again before we go to the mouth. We notice that in between 1991 and 2006, 2007, the number of headwaters individuals declined and then shot up again. We had some introduction of some species from the south on freshwater drum. And so those species increased their number toward the mouth. And then we have another decrease in the number of individuals in the headwaters, coming up to a point those that point at about 22, mile 22 or so, was the introduction of those species that had been on the freshwater drum moving upriver. And we noticed that for a number of species, which is on the right, that the same trend is being demonstrated. We have some loss of species in the headwaters, but a dramatic loss of species in the headwaters this last 15 years. East Fork is the same thing, but if we look at the East Fork and just get rid of the blue line, and we look at the orange and the gray lines, we see there's very little change in the East Fork, Little Miami Rivers mussels. So here's some of the highlights. So the washboard, Megalonias nervosa, we found that both in 2006, 2019. So that species seems to be stable in the Little Miami River. That's a state endangered species. The warty back we found in 1991 and 2006, 2007. That one we only ever find when we're doing quadrat sampling, because you can see it's completely buried in the substrate. And I believe that that's probably still in the system. However, I believe that the last 3, little spectacled case, bean shell, and snuff box, have probably been extirpated from the system. We haven't found them since 1991. And some of the lowlights are that whenever I go to the stream bed, the first thing I look at are the rocks, and I look for the river snails on top of those rocks, and I didn't find any in the lower portion of the Great Miami River. What I found instead was sediment. I would lift some of these rocks over, and there would be river snails in the bottom of them. But what I found mostly was that the river snails were replaced by the second photograph, which are the pouch snails. And then in other places, I noticed that where we found living mussels like we have down here, and freshly dead shells of these living mussels, we found so many more weathered and subfossil shells than we found fresh. And Here's another example of that. And then one last thing was that following rain events, we had streams that look like this up in the right-hand corner. There were some other highlights, though, that I think I should probably mention. It's not all bad news here. We did have large numbers of spikes in kidney shell in the East Fork. We had juvenile mussels that we found both in the main stem and the East Fork, so there is reproduction of mussels going on here. We found a large population of three ridge, which is on the decline in Ohio, in the main stem, and then we had all of these mussels that get attached to the freshwater drum as host in the system. And so I'm going to run out of time to tell some of these mussel stories, and so I won't tell these stories right here, but let me tell this story about the return of mussels to the Scioto River. And so my advisor for my PhD, Dave Stansbury, would tell me stories about him and Milt Troutman going downstream of Columbus and collecting on the Scioto River, and they were horror stories. But here's what's been happening lately: the mussels of the Scioto River. At one point, there were none, according to Dave Stansbury, but there are 4 locations here that I've sampled recently. And at this lowermost one, we had 16 species of mussels, including over 200 of this Ohio threatened species. At this second site, we had 21 living species, including this Ohio threatened species, which has also moved into lower Big Walnut Creek and Darby Creek. And then here we have 14 living species, including this Ohio threatened species. And then just recently at the 70-71 split, let's see, I'll do one more. We found 11 species of mussels in the impoundment behind the Greenlawn Dam and over 1,300 maple leafs that we relocated upstream. So here are those same data, and I just point out the species in bold. These are all the species that are being brought into Ohio and increasing its numbers throughout the state in our larger rivers, all of which use the freshwater drum as host. And you'll notice between sites 3 and 4 that only one of those species is represented there. That's because the Greenlawn Dam prevents the rest of them from moving out. They're moving from downstream. And so mussels are thriving in some portions, mostly our big rivers, and also behind dams, as it seems. And so the Ballville Dam and the Sandusky River, when we notched the Ballville Dam, we relocated over 11,000 mussels. And you can see some of them in the right and the left, including the ones in the left, which are those purple wartybacks. When the Fifth Avenue Dam and the Olentangy River was removed, over 7,500 mussels of 13 species were collected. And just this last October, Cody Fleece from Stantec salvaged mussels following the removal of the 6 Mile Dam in the Walhonding River. And he took a photograph, it was on his LinkedIn page, of this bucket of rabbit's foots. Now, I've never seen so many rabbit's foots. And he also had some sheep's nose, both of which are federally threatened, the rabbit's foot, and federally endangered, the sheep's nose. So the Walhonding River seems to be supporting some of these mussels as well. And so the status of mussels in Ohio, 57% of them are listed as rare. Large rivers, the Scioto, the Great Miami, the Muskingum, the Maumee, they're doing pretty well. There are millions of state-listed mussels in these systems. But we don't really know so much about our medium-sized streams, like the Olentangy, the Little Miami, Walhonding, Tuscarawas. They're a mixed bag. Some of them we can demonstrate some decline because we've been out there to look, but mostly we just don't have the information we need. Bob had talked about perhaps doing the Olentangy this next year. It would be 30 years since we got into the Olentangy last to do a survey. Oops. And then the small and headwater streams are suffering. And so we get mussel die-offs like in Darby Creek, and we get the loss of headwater species. There's some real problems here that we just haven't identified, but I believe they're out there. With that, I will thank you for your attention and answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hogarth.
Yep.
We have some questions here, so let me get those pulled up. Heather asks, do corbicula directly impact native mussels?
Yes, there are data out there that show that corbicula can interfere with habitat for mussels. They live, at least the juvenile ones, they can live in the same environment as those freshwater mussels, and they also compete with them for food. They're eating the same materials as a freshwater mussel juvenile, and so even in Little Miami, the second set of data, there was a switch point when you had a concentration of corbicula at such a level, I think it was 20 per square meter, that freshwater mussel diversity decreased significantly. Yep.
Okay, and James Spetz asks, what is the net impact of dam removals on the Ohio mussel populations?
Well, I have to believe, I think it's pretty early to tell what what that might be right now, but I have to believe that it's going to be good for freshwater mussels of Ohio, because what it's going to do is going to allow the connectivity of these mussels from downstream to upstream, and we're going to be able to have fish moving in, and then those fish delivering those juvenile mussels to these different habitats. On the Sandusky River, the Ballville Dam, downstream of the Ballville Dam, there was essentially, it was a sediment poor environment. There was no sediment for mussels to actually move into. There was so much sediment behind that dam that sediment now is being redeposited over the lower Sandusky River. And that's going to be good for mussels because they're finally going to have a habitat where they can live. So I have to believe that the overall impact of dam removal on mussels will be positive.
Okay, great. Mike Eckberg asks, any idea as to what is causing the decline in mussels and headwater streams?
Yeah, I think it's not a single problem. I think it's a multitude of problems in headwater streams. And so I think that, part of it is the excessive siltation that we're seeing in all of our streams. I think part of it is that we have single pollution events that might mussels they can clam up, and so they're not as susceptible necessarily to acute pollution events as they would otherwise be. But if that pollution event removes a fish host, even for a short period of time during the reproductive season, then that group of mussels no longer has that reproductive ability for that year, or maybe 2 years, or whatever that happens to be. And so there are just so many small things that add up to cause the problems we have in our headwater streams. And I think part of it too is that there's less water, and there's less of a dilution factor in some of these headwater streams, and so all of these things become even more problematic.
Okay, and kind of a follow-up question, similar along those lines, from the Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District. Aside from sediment, what are some of the most important water quality stressors to mussel populations?
Probably the one that I would put, hand in hand with sedimentation would be hypoxia or oxygen reduction. Freshwater mussels are the largest of our benthic organisms. They require quite a bit of oxygen to maintain their mass. And wherever we have an event that causes a decrease in oxygenation, it might be an algal bloom that the algae then die, and we get a hypoxic situation downstream. It could be a number of different things, but that's probably the hand in hand with sedimentation is reduction in oxygen that can occur. And then probably there's construction, that in-stream construction that causes problems for mussels. Right now, all mussels in Ohio are protected, and so we relocate mussels prior to known construction activities, but I'm sure that we don't get all of them, and I'm sure that the ones we relocate aren't necessarily doing as well as one would hope.
And one last question, can you comment on mussel bola?
Mussel bola?
Yes, I guess that's a reference to a mussel virus.
Yeah, I would think so, but no, I can't.
That's from Bill Sheeman.
Okay. Yeah, I know that I know that there are viruses out there that people have been examining as causes for mussel die-offs and things like that. It makes sense. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. Mussels could be could be the same.
Thank you very much again, Dr. Hogarth. We
Uh-huh.
appreciate you taking the time. And, for from the Scenic Rivers Program perspective, freshwater mussels and what's going on with their populations, particularly in some of our highest quality streams like the Big and Little Darby Creeks and Little Miami River, where we have outstanding fish populations and fish populations are expanding, doing very well, yet we're seeing declines in freshwater mussels. So it's something that we're very concerned about and something we'll continue to look at and try to investigate. And like we've mentioned here a couple of times, already have spoken with Dr. Hogarth about doing a survey of the Olentangy next year. So everybody out there, if you're interested in the Olentangy, stay tuned for that. And we may see that happening next year. So thank you again, Dr. Hogarth.
Yep.
So our final speaker for the day, Martin McAllister, who has retired several years ago from the Department of Natural Resources. He was in the Division of Natural Areas and Preserves, working in Southern Ohio. He is now the Appalachian Forests Project Manager with the Nature Conservancy in Ohio and one of the founders of the Friends of Scioto Brush Creek. Martin has an undergraduate degree from Shawnee State Community College. He got in 1983 and has worked in the field of conservation for over 36 years. So Martin's going to talk to us today about the Scioto Brush Creek, and this is a very timely subject matter. Scioto Brush Creek, I've been to it, visited a few times. It's a phenomenal stream system, beautiful stream system. And one area that the Scenic Rivers Program has never had a designated river in is southeastern Ohio and southern Ohio. So it's something that we're a gap that we're looking to fill. And there's many high quality streams in that region of the state. So some of these streams like Scioto Brush Creek may someday be a potential scenic river. So Martin, welcome, glad to have you. Good to see you. You need to unmute yourself, Martin.
Not too many things going on my screen. Can y'all hear me now? Give me a thumbs up.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to start this here from the beginning. All right, can you see that first screen, Bob?
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and talk about Scioto Brush Creek. Being the last speaker of the day, this talk's probably going to have an entirely different flavor than the ones we've had so far. I'm just super excited about this stream. I grew up here and glad to be able to share it with you all today. And I want to talk about watershed education, awareness, and involvement in a rural community. Before I even get started, I want to make sure that I thank some folks that were key in helping provide me with images and especially video for the talk. And David and Laura Hughes, especially for their outstanding aquatic wildlife videos. John Howard, Jim McCormick, Nathan Mullins, Brian Prose, my daughter actually, Autumn McAllister, and many volunteers with the Friends of Scioto Brush Creek pitched in to supply images for this. So throughout the course of today in this symposium, we've heard from Brian on fish and Mike on geology, Greg on hellbenders, and of course, Mike Hogarth is now on freshwater mussels, and Laura on water quality. And I have just been completely blown away by these presentations and the amount of information that it contains. I guarantee you, without a doubt, this is going to be the least technical talk of the entire day. But I certainly have enjoyed all of these presentations thus far. And just think about how far we've come in river conservation. Think about how far we've come just in my lifetime. I'm only 57, but in my lifetime, we've gone from a point where the Cuyahoga River could actually catch fire. You've all heard these stories. It didn't catch fire once, it caught fire over 12 different times. And those instances actually helped trigger the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the passage of the Clean Water Act, and in many ways, the establishment of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Program. We have come a long way just in my lifetime, and today's symposium is just a great way to demonstrate that. But we have a long way to go. We have a lot of things to do yet in river conservation in Ohio on big problems like harmful algal blooms that everybody's mentioned today, and even on the what would seem to be the most simple and ridiculously basic problem of why do people throw stuff in the water? Be able to figure out some of these problems. We do have a long way to go. Speakers have said today, I was glad to hear them say, it's not all gloom and doom. And if we want to continue to make progress in river conservation in Ohio, we can't just talk about all the negative things. We can't scare the young people in our communities, and we have to give them hope, and we have to help them have a passion and an excitement for their streams. Think back to the words of Mary Mertz this morning when she first opened up the symposium, when she was talking about remembering the streams that you played in as a child, the streams where you caught critters and flipped over rocks and caught frogs and crayfish. Think of those things and think of the passion that you had for that as a child. And you went on to become professionals in this field. We need to be able to create mechanisms and programs to help create that same passion in people that live and work in these watersheds, but are not professional conservationists. We essentially need to figure out a way to help people fall in love with their streams in their neighborhoods and maintain that passion and that caring for their entire life. As I said, even if they're not a conservationist, but as someone who lives in a watershed, they will have direct impact on that watershed. Rivers and streams of our nation are the life's blood of our nation. And I am fascinated by this map, as I'm sure all of you are. It bears more than just passing resemblance to the circulatory system in our own bodies that is so important to life. I actually grew up on a teeny tiny little capillary of this giant circulatory system. It barely even shows up on this map, but if you know where to look, right at the tip of that arrow, you see a little tiny Y-shaped stream. That is Scioto Brush Creek. That's where I grew up. I've lived here my whole life. My grandchildren now are the 9th generation of my family to live in this watershed. And we all sort of took it for granted growing up. We played there, we swam there. We really didn't think a whole lot about it. But then in 1990, I went to work for the Division of Natural Areas and Preserves. I was in my 20s and I ran into this gentleman, a man named Dan Rice. I don't know if Dan's participating today or listening out there, but But Dan, I remember well a conversation I had with you in a hallway of Building F at Fountain Square when I was a new employee, and you asked where I was from, and I said Raritan, Ohio. And right away, you recognized the town name and the fact that it was alongside of Brush Creek, and you went on to tell me all the fascinating things you knew about it. And I was just entirely blown away that someone from Columbus would be so excited about a little stream in my backyard and know so much about it. And I never forgot that conversation. A few things about the stream. You won't find any charts and graphs in my talk. This is mostly just photos, but just a little bit of information here. It's located almost entirely in Adams and Scioto counties. It's on the western edge of the Allegheny Plateau. It actually drains eastward into the Scioto River, which is really interesting because it flows out of the bluegrass region into the edge of the escarpment, which is really interesting to me geologically. The watershed is only about 273 square miles, so not huge. Most of it's exceptional warm water habitat, but what's really key to the high water quality of this stream and its pristine condition is the fact that it's 81% forested still. 81% of the entire watershed is forested. Some pretty large chunks are actually part of Shawnee State Forest and Brush Creek State Forest and the Edge of Appalachia Preserve. And it's home to fewer than 9,000 people. So that's two things that's got going for it right there that helps make it an outstanding stream. Now, as you all probably are aware, it's a lot easier to maintain high quality stream than it is to try to restore one to a state of high quality. And it's a lot cheaper too. But never having forgotten that conversation with Dan Rice, just a few years after that, I was in a meeting with some other folks on another matter, and the subject turned to Scioto Brush Creek, and we started talking about, yeah, this is it's a cool stream, and it's got a lot of things going for it, and there are hellbenders there, and there are native breeding populations of muskie, and all these things, and a handful of people said we should do something for the stream, just something. What should we do? And so our journey, the journey of the Friends of Scioto Brush Creek, has its roots in that conversation with Dan Rice and the decision that other small group made just a few years later to take one small action step, just something. We wanted to physically do something. So we actually organized a handful of people and we went out to pick up trash along the creek one day. Now that doesn't seem like much, right? You know, you're just picking up some trash and the next time the water comes up, it's going to be just as bad. Well, what we didn't expect to take place necessarily was the fact that the people that showed up that day began to talk amongst themselves about their passion for the creek, about other things that they could do, about ways they could get their friends and neighbors involved. And that really began to catch fire in the community. So our thought process began to switch from just doing small things like cleaning up trash to doing more important things like changing attitudes of future generations of people that live in this watershed. And so we actually met as a group, about a dozen of us. We met at a home that's actually located just off to the right of your screen there on this beautiful stretch of creek near the village of McDermott to formalize our mission. And we wanted to actually set down on paper what we were going to try to do. And that was to maintain and improve the water quality of Scioto Brush Creek through education, awareness, and involvement of local residents. And the three most important words in that, of course, are education, awareness, and involvement. Although we labored over all of these, we wanted to make sure folks knew that we were trying to maintain existing high water quality, that we were willing to work to improve on that because there's always room for improvement. We wanted to focus on education, awareness, and involvement, of course. And very key to this is we wanted to focus on local residents because we felt it was the people who lived in the watershed that has the most impact on the quality of the water in that watershed. One of the things that's most important in that mission is education. We launched an effort soon after that in the late 1990s called Scioto Brush Creek Day. And every fifth grade student in Northwest Elementary School, which is the primary school in this watershed, is invited out to the creek for a whole day experience every year for hands-on science at rotating learning stations And some of these kids have now grown up and have kids of their own that have come back to the program. We've been going now for over 20 years, and over 2,600 students have participated in the program. A huge thanks to the Department of Natural Resources for their support. We could not do this without them. Professionals from the Division of Wildlife, Parks, Watercraft, Soil and Water, Scenic Rivers, and especially, I don't know if Mike Greenley's listening out there, if any of you know Mike Greenley, but my gosh, that guy is a hero. He has participated every single year and has never missed a year in 22 years. Before the kids ever come out to the class, or excuse me, to the field day, we go into their classroom. We send volunteer educators into their classroom to prepare them on concepts like, what is a watershed and what animals live in the stream itself. And we get them ready for their field trip. Once they come out, they rotate through various learning stations. One of them is stream quality monitoring. I'm sure you all are aware of that, where water quality can be relatively easy to ascertain just by what's living in the water. And this harkens back to when you're all, that little kid wading around in the stream, flipping stones and catching things. And students absolutely love this activity, and it teaches them a lot. They also study fish ecology, and Mike and his crew come out to do electrofishing. And you may or may not know that 80 different species of fish have been documented in this stream over the past 99 years, and plus 4 hybrids. And all of those species that have ever been found, except one, still occur there. So we have 79 species of fish there, everything except the trout perch. And within just a few minutes, we'll have probably 30% of that diversity represented in one big tank that each student can get an opportunity to come up and examine some of these species up close for the first time, and realize that these creeks have more in them than just bass, bluegill, and everything else that when I was a kid, we just called bait. Also in education, we have a station called the stream table or hydrology. You've probably seen these before, but these tables can be set up where students can create their own stream channel, choose what they want on the sides of the stream, on the bank, whether they build houses or plant trees. They can adjust the flow of the water and see how the stream channel responds to that flow of water and the placement of those either conservation measures or development measures. They also study the terrestrial wildlife that call the watershed home, not just the things in the water, but also the things in the uplands. Also, since we're inviting kids to come to the water and we want them to explore the water at home, we want them to be safe. And so the Division of Watercraft, of course now the Division of Parks and Watercraft, usually attend and present on water and boating safety, which is really important to this. Lastly, since kids are kids and they need to run around, we make sure that we give an opportunity for them to be much more physical. And so we've created activities that they're able to learn about things like predator and prey relationships in the aquatic food chain, but they're burning off energy and being physical and being kids at the same time. So they're learning and they don't even realize they're learning. The second leg of this three-legged stool is awareness, and we try to generate greater awareness in the people that live in the watershed, especially through our annual membership meetings. We have guest speakers that come in, we have food, we present awards. It's just a great way to come together as a community to learn more about your stream. We also do a quarterly newsletter, the old-fashioned way. We distribute it electronically too, but we print out these things every year. We stuff the envelopes by hand and we send them out to folks that live in the watershed and our members. We also do direct mailings too to folks that live in the watershed about serious water quality issues that they need to be aware of and things that they can do near their home and farm to address those issues. Also in awareness, we do local outreach. We started going to the county fair in the early years and we could talk to literally thousands of people in a few days. But what we realized is that not a lot of those people lived in the watershed. We wanted to talk to the folks that actually live there. So now we focus on an event called the Raritan Whitetail Deer Festival. It's mostly a sporting event and a sportsman event, but we set up multiple freshwater fish aquariums and we have different species on display live. The folks that come to this festival are typically folks that live nearby. It's a great opportunity for us to make contact one-on-one with the folks that live there and tell them the fascinating stories of the things that live there, from the hellbenders to the American eel. And lastly, the third leg of the stool, if you will, is involvement. We want to get people involved. We want them to have a sense of community. We want them to understand what a watershed is and what their presence, their farm, their home, their lives in that watershed, what impact it has on water quality. We always have food. We always commune together. We welcome friends and neighbors, and we welcome them to get involved. And in some ways, they can get involved in specific projects like tree planting that we've done over the years to restore repairing corridors alongside of Brush Creek. We do a lot of cleanups. It's easy to get people involved in this kind of thing. We have adopted a section of highway along the creek. And this may seem a little bit corny. It's like, well, why are you wasting your time doing that? Well, it's right along the creek, so some of this trash will wind up in the water. But more importantly, we made this decision consciously and strategically so that the people that drive this highway and live in this community can see us out there volunteering our time to make their community better. And we're not doing anything threatening or controversial. We're not beating our fists on tables in public meetings and screaming about endangered species and things like that. We're doing good work in the community to improve the community, the stream, and the lives of the people that work there and live there. We also do a sweep each year by canoe. So this usually involves 30 some canoes, or 16 or 20 canoes or so, and 30 or 40 people. We'll clean up a section of stream, maybe 3 or 4 miles in length, pull out all the debris that we can find, recycle what can be recycled, and properly dispose of the rest. We also award people the recognition they deserve for the volunteer hours that they put in. We award a small miniature paddle every year, engraved with the appropriate language. And what's really interesting is these 3 folks in the lower right-hand corner there have gone on. They started out with our group and became interested and helped us. And then they went on to grow and to develop other efforts in the watershed. This fellow here, Norval Davis, he thought it was a travesty that this covered bridge across Scioto Brush Creek was about ready to collapse. He worked with the county commissioners and helped them get a grant so that bridge could be completely restored. Sam and Thelma Shirey, they've been with our group now for over 15 years. They worked with the township trustees to organize and develop and acquire the grants necessary to set up the very first community park in Brush Creek Township. And that all started with our group. This young lady, Shannon Browning, she came to us as a 5th grader and participated in our events. Came back as a high school student, as a volunteer to help the kids during the field day. Went on to college, became a board member on our group, and helped establish the first ever Brush Creek scholarship that is awarded every year to students studying biology or ecology. Now, as we begin to draw to a close here, I know I'm about out of time. Think back to that stream that you grew up near. Maybe it was just a small little ephemeral stream, or even a ditch in an urban environment, and you were there exploring it. Think back to that. Think of the passion that you had for that river, that stream. And if people like you are not able or willing to maintain that passion and carry it forward, if people like you can't do that work, who will? We are all conservationists. Everybody that's participating here today is conservationists, but it's the people that live in these watersheds that we need to get excited about river conservation. I want to leave you with a couple of questions and a lot of slides here real quickly at the end. What's going to be the first step in your journey to conserve a stream near you? What very first conscious decision will you make to take action on a stream that's important to you? Really, that comes down to, what do you want your stream to be? I hope you enjoyed that little talk and some inspiration to go out and conserve a stream near you. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have if there's time about the Friends of Sight of Brush Creek or the stream itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Are there any questions for Martin? I have a comment here from Meg Marhelski. Says, great presentation, Martin.
Thank you.
Stephen Sane says, thank you, Martin. Aaron Rohr, thank you, Martin. So we're getting comments. Don't have any questions yet.
That's quite all right. And I know I ran a little over on time, so if there aren't any, that's quite all right. You can reach me at fosbc@scpwildblue.com. My day job's with the Nature Conservancy, but I spend my free time volunteering with the Friends of Sight of Brush Creek. So you can reach me in a variety of different ways. You can find us on Facebook as well.
Well, thank you very much again. And from the Scenic Rivers perspective, I know I always got a few comments to add myself, but this is really, having worked in river conservation for almost 30 years now on these scenic rivers all across the state, this type of local support and caring and concern about the river resource is really a key to being successful. We can come out and designate a river as a scenic river, and it would be meaningless if we didn't have this type of local support at the grassroots level, people that care about the stream, that want to help and support our efforts. And we support the local community's efforts to conserve that stream. It's really a big partnership. And these are the areas where we have the greatest level of success, is where we have strong local partnerships on the scenic rivers, and a lot of people that care about the system and are really, really willing to work hard to protect it. So hats off to you, Martin. You've done a lot of great work down there, and just give us a call sometime if you ever want us to come talk about scenic river designation. Be happy to
consider this the call, Robert.
Okay, we'll be happy to look at that with you. More than happy to look at that with you and your friends down there. So
Very good.
I think thanks again. I think now we're going to go into breakout sessions. So I have to look to our host, Dana. I don't know if that's going to automatically occur here any moment now, or.
Yes, I have unmuted. I will give just a quick overview on the activity. For anyone who is not interested, if you could slip off the call, because we are randomly putting people into rooms, and that will make the rooms more equal. What we're doing is just trying to facilitate that hallway conversation that we aren't getting in this virtual space typically. So these breakout rooms will have between 5 to 7 people in them. And I've given you a couple of questions to get the conversation started. But knowing this audience as well as I do, I don't think you even need those questions. Likely there will be a couple of leaders that get it going. And I will continue to admit people. We have offered this invitation to the other session as well. So we may get some latecomers that may not have attended the talks earlier, but certainly we welcome them into this small group discussion. So you will get a countdown at the end of the breakout time to finish up the conversation, and then the Zoom platform will automatically put everyone back into this room collectively, and then we'll have some closing remarks. So I will go ahead and launch the breakout rooms. Giving a couple more people time to slip out, because we're getting smaller and smaller participants in each of the rooms. I'll give it just a little bit of time to stabilize. I don't want the rooms to be too small. All right, here we go.